Welcome to the IDV Pavilion of the Americas, where we will have an interesting conversation. I would like to introduce to Carlos Costa, who will do the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the panel ClimateScanner, an innovative assessment on climate finance. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Carlos Costa. I work at the Brazilian Court of Audit, and I am the Director of Environmental Audit. It's my pleasure, my honor to be the moderator this afternoon, and I'd like to introduce and to thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for being here. It will be a great session. Vivi, Svaran, Dashiell, and Graham. I expect a lot of good conversation, discussions. And just to give you an idea, I also like to thank you, IDB, for letting us organize this session here. And we are we have I would say, a kind of long-standing relationship with a partnership with IDB, and we expect to improve to this partnership. So I'd like just before handing over to the panelists, I'd like to mention the main objectives of the session. So one is promote a discussion on how the mobilization of climate finance can catalyze the implementation of public policy for climate change. Also to raise awareness on the importance of climate finance, transparency and accountability. Also we'd like to highlight the strategic role of multilateral development banks, for example, the IDB. So, first of all, I'd like to start our panel with Vivi, which is the secretary of the Working Group on Environmental Audit. So please, Vivi, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, it's on. Yeah, hello everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I run or head the secretariat of the INTERSI Working Group on Environmental Auditing. And we are a global network with 86 member sites around the world, meaning supreme audit institutions, and we support in their audits on implementation of environmental and climate policies, and of course, like holding their governments accountable for their budget spending in this area. So we have both countries from Global South who have not necessarily done very much work in environmental and climate field, as well as very experienced sites, mainly in Global North. Okay, Brazil is one of the really engaged and like innovative side among our working group. But that is kind of also a challenge maybe from the secretariat perspective to try to serve all of these countries. So we have to have really ambitious projects, but at the same time make sure that particularly developing country size get necessary support. So we have worked with climate topics approximately 15 years, but the importance of them is continuously increasing. And in our current work plan, we have really heavy emphasis on climate and also like Nexus climate biodiversity. And we are so happy to have this ClimateScanner in the work plan to support all of the other projects. Just to maybe point out a couple of key findings that supreme audit institutions have done on climate in recent years. We did a kind of study or quick survey of the climate audits that have been submitted on our audit database. So what size call for is basically better and more reliable reporting on climate spending. And this includes also adverse spending, tax revenues like money not received into the budget, carbon pricing issues, definitely subsidies for fossil fuels. SAIS also call, of course, for effectiveness of budget spending, so we mainly deal with performance auditing. Of course, compliance auditing is there as well, but less maybe with financial auditing. And SAIS also call for awareness of the financial risks posed by climate and better risk management, impact assessments, measuring and reporting. And how I see now the role of the ClimateScanner here is in this kind of big picture and north and south is that it paves the way for the SAIS to kind of also start their very first environmental audit, because this is very structured framework, kind of good guidance, like what to do, what to seek, what to search, and anyway, like meant to be a relatively rapid review on data that's available there. So based on that exercise, also those newcomers have so much better kind of possibilities to start to ponder upon, like what kind of audits could they take, what are the areas that they find good for audits, where do they see major risks. So that's one of the benefits of this tool, I see. Of course, it's useful for everyone, and also like countries who have done long work with that. But even myself, when I did like this test round, I noticed how useful it is, and I learned like new things on Finnish government's actions based on that. Then concerning climate finance, which is one of the axes in this scanner tool, I could tell a little bit about the project we had. We concluded it last year, and it was led by SAI USA, but it indeed like focused on international climate finance. And we looked at it from the perspective of government external auditor, like how can you audit international climate finance? And there were like three main issues that we found. Like first of all, it concerned this 100 billion annual target. So now, of course, we have like new funds like loss and damage and so on, but we are here talking exactly about this 100 billion target. So the target is a global one, but then what about country targets? It's not kind of allocated to countries, and for instance, in our audits in Finland, we noticed that the country target was very vague. There actually wasn't any target. It was just like, oh, let's finance this, but hey, how much? I mean, whole strategy was basically missing. So it's a global one, but country targets can be vague. Second is like quite fundamental thing, like there's no internationally agreed on definition what is climate finance in the first place. So even if you were able to calculate, it's most likely that people calculate it or countries calculate it based on a bit like different methodology. So that's a key issue there. And then the third, which is of course like very much about performance auditing, like quantitative target doesn't say anything about quality. So what is the impact of funding? What is effectiveness? And this is somewhere where the work of SAIS could be useful. And like one more point there, that there is also some like recent research that this funding could actually go to the opposite direction if you do like very bad measures. It's not just that you are not achieving the intended results, but if you, for instance, plant trees in an area where there never was forest, where you're not supposed to have them, which mixes up whole of the water system as something like, I mean that could be controversial. So, but these are the points, like global, how about national target, what's the definition in the first place, and then how to assess the quality and effectiveness. And I think here ClimateScanner could help us. Yeah, thanks.
nice comments and observations. And it's important, as you mentioned, this lack of a common definition about climate finance is a challenge. So, and it's not a challenge for a specific country, but rather to all the world. And since we are talking about a Supreme Audit Institution, I'd like to invite Daciel Costa to present what is ClimateScanner, what is this, if you can put the presentation, the PowerPoint. Thank you so much. And Daciel, please start explaining what is a Supreme Audit Institution, what kind of work we do, and then, of course, you can delve into the ClimateScanner. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Thanks very much, and also thanks, Evie, for your speech. I think it's a lot of good lessons there. Okay, so let me begin by explaining Supreme Audit Institutions. Every country, or mostly every country, has one Supreme Audit Institution, which is an institution who is dedicated to conduct independent assessments on the actions of the governments. For example, how governments allocate their resources, how they perform in implementing public policies. We basically analyze what they do and write reports, communicate that to the society, and that information can be used for decision makers to improve their actions. So this is pretty much our job. And okay, I will begin my presentation, but I will use this PowerPoint freely just to give you a brief overview about the ClimateScanner tool. And after that, I would like to focus a little more on the finance axis of this methodology. Oh, okay, so I think, yeah, it's not on. Now it's okay. Let's begin. Oh, I was just speaking about Supreme Audit Institutions. So we have this national, how can I say, actions, but we also act in the international level. So in the international level, we have this umbrella organization, which is the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, called INTOSAI, who's currently being chaired by our SAI, SAI Brazil. The name of our SAI is the Federal Court of Accounts, so we work as a court. And in this period of ahead of INTOSAI, ClimateScanner is one of our priorities. Of course, this project is also part of the INTOSAI WGA the INTOSAI WGA's work plan for 2023 and until 2025, along with other projects, some of them focusing on other approaches towards climates as well, and other ones about sustainability, green fiscal policy tools, etc. This tool, this methodology, has been built in an aligned way to these international agreements we are already aware of. Okay, so to begin to tell a little bit of the story of this project, we held the official launch of ClimateScanner last year in November in Rio de Janeiro, in the International Congress of Supreme Audit Institutions. When I say SAIs, I mean Supreme Audit Institutions, just to make that clear. Okay, we are going to hear that acronym a lot today. And then this year, in 2023, we focused on building this methodology. So we had a lot of steps for building this methodology. First one was building an executive group of 18 SAIs representing different countries from the world. Let me see if I have a slide about the countries. Yes, I do. So these are the 18 countries who have helped us building this methodology. We have divided ourselves into teams. Each team was responsible for one axis. And in May, we had an in-person workshop in Brazil where we discussed what we wanted from this tool. Then in July, we met again so we could validate what we had built so far. And last September in Abu Dhabi, we actually, after July, we conducted some pilot tests to try this methodology, see how good it was in our national context. SAIs from the executive group were asked to try this methodology, to start making assessments, to see what adjustments we need to make to this tool. And then in September in Abu Dhabi, we made these adjustments. So we are bringing here to you today the final version of this methodology. Let me see. So just to say, in this executive group, we had the participation of more than 70 auditors dedicated to building this tool. Okay. So this methodology, now talking about the methodology, we have built it around 3 axes: climate governance, climate finance, and public policies for mitigation and adaptation. And just to give an overview, these are the components we have chosen for the governance. Of course, the purpose of ClimateScanner is having this broad scan on how governments are organizing themselves, how they are prepared to tackle climate change. So it's a broad list of topics. Of course, we can't cover everything because we're trying to make this tool feasible for all SAIs in the world. But these are the topics we have chosen as the most relevant and that we considered as common issues to countries participating. We have this ambitious target of having more than 100 SAIs the next year applying this tool, so it has to be kept feasible so SAIs are able to apply this tool. So we have 10 components in the governance axis. We have 5 more in the public policies axis. And in the finance axis, it seems like it's the simplest one because we have only 4 components, but the truth is it's probably the most complex one because each one of these components addresses a very complex issue. As you can see, the first component addresses domestic climate finance. So we are trying to see whether governments have included climate into their budgets, if they are able to track direct and indirect climate finance, and also if they are reporting on how they are using these resources to climate activities. In the second and third components, we turn our look into the international climate finance. So we have 2 different approaches here. Component F2 addresses provider countries. So what we're trying to see is whether these countries have committed their resources to developing countries, whether they are actually disbursing these resources, and whether they report on their disbursements. And on the corner of the developing countries, the recipient countries, we are trying to see if these countries, they have the capacity to identify how much they need in terms of financial resources, if they have capacity to receive these resources, if they are making sure these resources are being well applied, and whether they report on how they have been using these funds. And finally, component F4 is dedicated to how governments have been able to mobilize private finance into climate activities. So it's a different approach. And by doing this, we cover public climate finance and also private climate finance. So this is pretty much how this finance axis works. And now, moving on to the end of the presentation, I would just like to comment a little bit on the lessons learned from the pilot tests. So as I said, we had some pilot tests for this methodology around August and September, and I think that the most challenging axis for SAIs was the finance axis. Actually, the last component, the private finance component, was the one that SAIs struggled most with. So after the tests, we had to redesign a little bit the tool so it could be easier for SAIs to apply. We are also focusing on building this handbook and preparing this training to offer to SAIs next year so they're able to understand the methodology and address these complex climate finance issues. And yeah, and this is pretty much what we did to make SAIs able to assess climate finance in their countries. By the end of the year, by the end of the next year, we expect to have these more than 100 SAIs conducting these assessments, and we expect to consolidate the results into a global picture that we want to communicate at COP29. So I think this is it. Thanks very much, and I'll hand it back to Carlos.
Thank you, Dashiell. It was very clear and inspiring, and it's important to say this is a metric that was developed by an executive group, 17 countries, and then the European Court of Audit, and you could see that we have the participation of more than 70 auditors. So it shows how the methodology was improved along this year. And thank you so much. So would like to move forward. I'd like to invite Ms. Yasvaran. So if you could give us an overview about how governance and climate can be connected and what are the main challenges, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to talk again about climate governance. I'll talk briefly about governance like I did in the previous session, but focus more on how governance is important for attracting and mobilizing climate finance. So I hope that will be useful for this discussion. So I think, like I summarized in the previous session, like institutions absolutely matter. Whether we mainstream climate change thinking into the different institutions that exist in the polities of different countries, or we set clear targets and implement climate policies through purpose-built institutions dedicated to tackle climate change. The creation of institutions become quite crucial and important, particularly for three major issues. One is the lack of coordination that exists across different governing institutions within countries across the world, and this is a pattern that's observed both in developed countries as well as in developing countries. Second, arriving at consensus, managing the local context, local politics, and arriving at some form of consensus to move ahead is one of the most difficult areas, and the best way to do that is by providing a body of evidence. And not having an institution that accumulates and collects this evidence within a certain country makes it difficult to actually arrive at that consensus, whichever direction the country wants to take. And the third is strategy. For a wicked problem like climate change, we know that markets are not enough, that much more needs to be done to create this large-scale structural transformation that is necessary around the world in every country, and we don't have a lot of time. And one of the main ways in which government could steer in the direction of change is by having a proper, clear climate policy strategy. And having a clear strategy then de-risks and a lot of investments that could come in, creates an environment of policy certainty that then increases the confidence of private investors to invest in the energy transition. So these are the three main challenges in climate institutions and climate governance. And some of the best practices from our research that we have done so far have point out to the importance of purpose-built institutions. We've been advocating for every country to have a low carbon development commission or a net zero commission, whichever is the appropriate term to use for the country, and it's their choice. A commission that would then act as the repository of evidence and be backed by a law, possibly a climate law, and have the support of the parliament or the Congress in respective countries to the extent that it can direct different ministries to mainstream climate thinking into their decision making. And this, along with a parallel political body that is able to coordinate across these ministries, potentially under the direction of a prime minister or a president in president's office in a country, could have a significant impact. This would allow for strategies to develop and clarity for different ministries that are currently not sure about what they need to do in order for the energy transition to be effective, right? So that's the governance part in short. And I'll just try to connect that to why that is important to attract climate finance. I saw that there are 4 metrics here. One is domestic climate finance, another is international climate finance, and then there is private finance. So I'll start with international climate finance by providing examples of why institutions matter. So this is a research done by one of my colleagues at the Fletcher School, Tufts University. In fact, it was his PhD dissertation looking at climate funds, trust funds in different countries and how effective they were in attracting international climate finance. And one of the success stories is from Brazil, the Amazon Fund. Of course, it had a different outcome recently, pretty much becoming ineffective. But when it existed, it was one of the success stories in attracting significant finance from Norway, primarily because it gave the power to the local bodies in the Amazon regions to decide, how to disburse the fund, how to use the fund, and it had a very detailed reporting program that thereby Brazil could retain its sovereignty in terms of how to manage the fund and still be convincing enough for Norway to actually keep giving money. And the absence of doing this in countries like Bangladesh and Ethiopia, they were also creating climate trust funds. In fact, Ethiopia was one of the LDCs that had a climate neutral development strategy. They called it CRGE, Climate Resilient Green Economy Strategy, and they created a facility called the CRGE facility, but they were unable to attract the finance that the Amazon Fund or the Trust Fund in Indonesia was able to attract. And primarily the reason was that they did not have clear mechanisms on how to spend the money. And that was the biggest difficulty, right? So, and if you can't know how to spend the money and where the money would go, then you're not able to convince and attract and crowd in more climate finance. So that's an example on the international climate finance. And in domestic climate finance, I'll give the example of how India de-risked a lot of renewable energy investments from 2010. It launched a technology-focused mission called the Solar Mission to deploy a lot of renewables. And the first thing it did was to create a project financing agency. It was a non-banking financial institution, and it was a purpose-built institution to reduce the risk premium for renewable energy projects, which used to come with a significant risk. India's sovereign risks itself meant that finance would flow at 12 to 14% interest rates, and the risk of investing in renewables made it even higher and prohibitive. So it created a project finance institution arm supported by the government that then significantly de-risked investments over time to the extent that private capital started flowing. And now it has taken a step back and starting to de-risk some of the upcoming solar technologies rather than the traditional PV deployment. So that is one way to mobilize and crowd in more domestic climate finance. The other way to raise more domestic climate finance is through taxation. Again, I'll very parochially come up with the example from India. It's a country that depends significantly on tax revenues from fossil fuels. But as the society decarbonizes, going to the next 30 years, all the fossil fuel revenues are going to dry up. And the central and the state governments depend on more than 10 to 15%, depending on the states, on fossil fuel tax revenues for welfare spending. So now it's thinking about a tax shift, a shift from taxation on fossil fuels to a shift to a tax on carbon. And doing so, it hopes to stabilize government revenues to the level that it is at least today, so that welfare spending can continue to happen. At the same time, provide a policy signal for the industry and other sectors through a taxation on carbon to decarbonize the businesses. So that's another way to mobilize domestic climate finance. And an instrument like that then provides more confidence for more investment, more finance to flow in from the private sector. And the second example of crowding in more private finance is through the issuance of green bonds. Several countries have floated green bonds, including India recently, and that then builds confidence for the private sector to crowd in. And the third important instrument that I'll provide an example from China is green lighting and red lighting investments. China has this very classic approach of traffic lights. It'll green light, orange light, and red light investments. And it has been consistently green lighting investments to the clean energy sector. And that has, in fact, reduced the risk premium over time for private finance to flow. So I'll stop with these examples, and I'm happy to discuss more.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting because you mentioned not only the challenges, but also the best practice. So it's good to have the concrete examples. And I forgot to introduce yourself. So Ms. Yasvaran, he works as a researcher at the Sustainable Futures Collaborative. And now we have the honor to hand over the mic to Ms. Grahan. He's the Chief of Climate Change Division of the IDB. So please, and thank you for hosting this event. We are very pleased to be here.
So right off the bat, thank you for coming. You know, 5 years ago, I would have been surprised to be on a panel with a set of auditors. Not all of us are auditors, but I think it's indicative of how things are changing. And I wanted to take you through the story of how we did mainstreaming in the IDB. Because actually, we started with the energy sector, because it seems obvious to start with the energy sector. Then we went to transport, agriculture, water, financial capital, financial systems, capital markets, fiscal management, social systems, innovation, and finally we ended up with institutions. But the question should have been asked, why didn't we start with institutions? And I actually raised that question the other day. And I guess it's because you need to have some things on the ground to begin with. But ultimately, institutions are probably the most important. If the institutions don't work, you're not going to be able to deliver. So I wanted to start with that little narrative simply because this is a discussion we should have been having a long time ago. And now we're beginning to have it. And then I wanted to talk, I guess before jumping into the climate finance side of things, congratulations. This is great. This is going to be, it's going to evolve, but it's a great starting point, and it's going to be very important. And I think it's going to be increasingly important as more and more countries begin to transform, to work out how to transform. Having a way of measuring that actually helps you think about, okay, well, I should be thinking about this, not this. This hasn't worked here, this has worked here, and being able to share information as you move forward, both in the governance area and also in the climate finance area. Some factoids on climate finance for Latin America and the Caribbean. We did a paper which actually asked how much is it going to cost to deliver the Paris Agreement. It's about, we estimate it's between 470 billion and 1.3 trillion. The next obvious question is, okay, well, where's the money going to come from? And what money is available? Interestingly, the total amount of money flowing from concessional international finance resources is only about $2 billion. And I say only, it sounds like a big number, but compared to the need, it's not a big number. You could probably increase that, you can double it up, 4 billion, but that's the scale at which you're looking. The MDBs and bilateral finance probably delivers about 15 billion at the moment, and the commitment is to triple that. So you could get that up to 45, 50 billion. So that's another, it's an important source, but we're still not even at the 470 billion. Where that money is going to come from is exactly what we were just talking about. It's going to come from public finance changes and from private finance. So I think that point is absolutely key. About a year and a half ago, we responded to a request from our governors, who are ministers of finance, to set up a platform of ministries of finance. And that the purpose of that platform was for the ministries of finance to discuss climate. And I want to parallel your process, because here's what they wanted to talk about. Debt management and green finance, investment plans, thematic bonds, income and fiscal incentives, carbon markets, subsidies, taxes and carbon prices, cap and trade systems, and public spending, tracking public spending, how do you invest in green infrastructure, public finance management. Those were the three groups of areas they prioritized as ministers of finance that they wanted to talk about, which parallel, not perfectly, but they parallel the issues that you've been raising here. So the ministries of finance themselves are starting to go, well, we need we have a problem, we have an issue, we're going to have to change things, we're going to have to move forward. So I think it's interesting that they're moving in the same direction, as it were. You mentioned climate methodologies, and we've mentioned it sometimes. We actually do have a climate methodology, and it's the MDB methodology. OECD takes the data that we use and they recalculate it because you have to look at the allocations and things like that. We do have a methodology, it's quite complex, and the adaptation methodology and the mitigation methodology are very different in the way they're approached. We've been using it now for 13 years and tracking over time. It evolves bit by bit, but it does exist. It's not a global standard, but there's a basis from which to build to actually look at methodologies. We've added to that Paris Agreement alignment as a methodology as well, which is slightly different, but it's asking the question, is this aligned to Paris or is this not aligned to Paris? I think it still needs work, but now we're executing, we're implementing, so we're learning as we go forward. And I think that the question you raised about impacts is crucial, because one of the problems we have is a lot of our metrics are input metrics. We're asking how much money did we spend, how much did we put, but we aren't asking the question about quality of spend. We're not asking what are the impacts of those spending. And we're now beginning to work with the World Bank on how to do that as a set of MDs, how to measure those things. And I completely agree that in some cases you get the clear examples of you spend and you think you're spending on climate, but actually you're spending against climate, maladaptation, those kinds of things. We're seeing that. It's not like it's a one-off case, it's actually happening. So, we're going to shift gears a little bit now. I'm fascinated by transformations and how they happen. And if you haven't read her books, read Carlota Perez, because she's a Venezuelan, she's now working in the UK. But what she's done is looked at transformations over the last 250 years. Revolutions, in essence. You hear Mark Carney and you hear John Kerry talk about this is a green revolution or a climate revolution. They use different language for it, but this is not the first time this has happened. The Industrial Revolution of 1770 was followed by the steam and coal revolution of 1820, followed by oil in 1870, followed by combustion engine vehicles in 1910, followed by basically the digital revolution in the 1970s. Every 50 years. We're now 50 years on, and there's a revolution happening. And if you want to see the evidence, look at the Fatih Birol's IEA reports on the investments in renewable energy. They went from 500 billion to 1.2 trillion to an estimated 1.8 trillion this year. That's a doubling time of a year and a half or less. That's exponential growth. That's a blowout. And it's already happening. They're already predicting that the similar patterns are starting to happen with growth in electric vehicles. We are in a revolution. But what's more interesting about Carlota Perez's work is she asked the question, what are the characteristics of these revolutions? The first thing is you need new technologies. Your program doesn't measure new technologies per se, but that's the base. The new technologies come in, they start exploding, you see them, but that doesn't mean anything because they're not being implemented yet, they're not moving yet. And you can look back at each of those revolutions and there's usually a base technology change, but then it triggers, like somebody today described it to me as popcorn. You start getting multiple other technology things shifting. But what do you need to make that actually happen? Governance and finance. Your two areas. If you don't have those, you can have one, but if you don't have the other, it doesn't happen. It's not guided. And it's the leadership of the institution, it's the capacity of the institution to see the future and say, I want to go here, and then guide it to go there, because it's complex. You're talking about changing, right now we're talking about changing the energy base of the world. That's not a little change. That's a huge change. And each country needs to think about it. How am I going to do this? That's the leadership. You need the governance processes to be able to do that. You need the institutions to be transversal, long-term. These are huge changes in the way people work and how they work. So you need that. But it also doesn't happen if you don't have the finance. And where does that finance come from? It comes from the previous revolutions. It comes from, and I use this example and I use it loosely, but the first industrial revolution, the money for that industrial revolution for textiles came from slavery and agriculture. That's where the money was made. But that money had to be shifted from one goal to another goal. And institutions like the Bank of England, the government at the time in Britain, made those decisions to move it in that direction. It's a fascinating area of work, but it fits perfectly with what you're trying to look at in terms of moving forward. So I think it's great. It's interesting that I'm coming at it from a completely different perspective from you guys, and we're coinciding on the same thing. We need to be able to measure these things. We need to be able to move forward. And I think, this is a plug for MDBs, I think MDBs are perfectly situated to help with this. We can work on innovation. We can work on the higher risk areas to be able to move them through. We can support capacity building and knowledge transfer and policy change and support the leadership to move the agenda forward. And we're finance. We can look at innovation in finance. And if you've been listening to our president, he's been talking about all these innovations and different ideas, different ways to crowd in private finance, from our private sector arm across to doing debt for nature swaps, not green bonds so much, because they suffer challenges of green premiums, but SLBs, sustainable linked bonds, different mechanisms, testing them, trying them, because we need to bring that private finance through. So I think we're uniquely positioned to help with this process. Ultimately, the hard work is the leadership and governance in the countries, though. That's the hardest part. So, I repeat, wow. Thank you for coming. It's not, you should not thank us. Thank you. I think we should deepen this discussion. We're very keen to. So we're going to be supporting the process as it goes forward to the extent that we can. I also think it's linked to a lot of the things that we're trying to do. We're trying to, for example, we launched recently a program called Bid Klima, which is actually going to ask the same questions. We're looking for indicators of governance to show that the Ministry of Finance is working with the Ministry of Environment and the sectors. We want to see that transversality. How do we measure that? So we're very interested in deepening the collaboration and moving forward. And I repeat, look, congratulations and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Graham. It was, your words for me was like a music for my ears. Because as you mentioned, I really like when you mentioned about revolution, you touch upon 3 points: new technologies, governance, and finance. And I can mention that ClimateScanner is making a revolution. So we have already the governance, we have already the tool, but we still need the finance. So we hope to count on IDB to support us, not only technically, but finance. So I think we are just in the end of our panel. I wonder if some panelists could make give us some final words, final message. And I would start as I start with Vivi, please.
Yeah, really fascinating. Maybe the one thing that I could still kind of reflect here in the end is the fact where I referred to in the beginning that for instance in this working group size are very different, but with this tool, like you are able to bring them together by combining this donor and recipient perspective. So I think that's something like quite valuable here, and that might also give some nice results also globally, possibly. Yeah, great.
Thank you. Please, Yasvaran. Okay, so Dasha, you go ahead.
Well, okay. What I would like to say is that, as you saw, our methodology is challenging. I think the target we set for ourselves is challenging to gather more than 100 SAIs to make this happen. We are fully committed to doing this in the next year. We are designing this training program. We are trying to go to regions to teach to other auditors from SAIs, even the SAIs that have least resources, how to take this methodology and apply it to their national context. We know that this is different to an audit, so they're not going to do full assessments, but we hope that this offers them a roadmap they can use to if they haven't had a contact with climate change before, that would be a chance for them to do so. And by the end of the year, we expect to have this big picture that the idea is to give this idea about where governments still need to focus more efforts to achieve changes, to make a powerful change to their action and deliver a better planet for us. So I think this is my hope with this project, and I'm pretty sure we can achieve that by the end of the next year.
Okay, thank you, Dasha. And please, Ms. Yasvaran.
I just want to emphasize again that institutions are a precondition for successful climate finance mobilization. I say this again because it starts with knowing where we are going first, right? Build the policy certainty that then builds the business certainty, and the flow of finance would then build public support, and public support then builds more political confidence to pursue the transition, and that then increases the business confidence furthermore, right? So this cycle has to be a virtuous cycle. You don't want this to go into a vicious cycle, and building these institutions and consciously thinking about it is crucial. And I'm really happy that this scanner tool will at least tell the countries how prepared they are in terms of their governance metrics. And the more improvement they make based on assessments like these, the better the flow of finance will be, and the better the energy transition will be for the countries. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And please, Grahan.
No, I just say thank you again to everybody. And look, we've been struggling with the institutional side of this for some time, and what we can offer is providing support to create the plans, to change the policies. But ultimately what we've seen is that the countries which have the leadership are the ones that are going to move most quickly. In Latin America, there's countries like Chile is moving very fast, Uruguay is moving very fast, Colombia is moving very fast, Barbados is moving very fast. But in addition, I mean, now we're seeing Brazil coming in at high speed and moving the agenda. We've got several other countries that are beginning to rethink how they're doing things, and they're starting to move. Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Panama. So there's like a cascade of countries, and it's a very risky virtuous cycle, because they're also finding some of the stumbling blocks for the change, and so they're discovering things. And I think part of the key is how can we share that information from one country to the other country as quickly as possible, so other countries don't follow in the same routes and make similar. They're not mistakes, they're just that nobody's done this before, so it's learning. So anyway, I would just end with that. I think that a tool like this can help us with that learning, with tracking and learning. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you all the panelists. You have made this session very special, and I just want to ask you a big applause to all the panelists, and thank you for your participation.